He smashed my piano, the only thing I had left after locking me in the basement like a useless dog. I once sang lullabies to them. Now they lull me with silence and captivity. But I survived, and I gave it all back with a song that made the whole world listen. If you think this is just another family drama, you're wrong. Subscribe now and don't miss the haunting stories we bring you next. It was 6:07 a.m. in New Orleans, and the rain hadn't come yet, but the sky warned otherwise. The wind dragged a slow moan across the decaying shutters of an old shotgun house tucked on Dauphine Street, the kind of house that whispered stories if you stood still long enough to listen. Inside, Margaret Dawson, once known to jazz lounges and black tie recital halls as the Magnolia Fingers, poured hot water into a chipped teacup. Her hands, veined like a river delta, trembled slightly, not with age, but with restraint. She had learned not to play for too long. The silence in the house, after all, had become more loyal than applause. Margaret was 72, and though her name had long faded from marquees, the music still played inside her. She had once sat at grand pianos in velvet gowns beneath chandeliers. Now she walked barefoot across warped floorboards, dodging spots where the wood had begun to rot from years of southern humidity and time's indifference. On one faded wall hung a framed black and white photo of her playing in Paris 1972, just after Nixon's visit to China. In the photo, she was vibrant, sharp-eyed, graceful, a woman who could command a concert hall with nothing but the first 3 notes of Chopin. That photo had started to bend at the corners, curling like dry leaves. Her days were quiet. Too quiet. She spoke to herself sometimes, only to hear a voice echo back. Her groceries were delivered bi-weekly. The delivery boy never made eye contact, and the old upright piano that sat in the parlor hadn't sung in almost a year, not since the electricity shorted during a thunderstorm and fried the amp on her antique keyboard. It hadn't been fixed, and not because she couldn't afford it. She could, but money meant less when no one expected you to live. The knock on the door came at 7:03 a.m., sharp, deliberate. Margaret flinched, the spoon in her teacup clinking against porcelain. Through the curtain she saw a tall figure in a gray suit and light brown shoes she'd helped pick out years ago. Travis, her only son. He was wiping raindrops off his forehead, though the sky hadn't dropped a thing yet. She opened the door with slow, measured dignity. "Mom," he said, his smile wide and rehearsed. "You look great." Margaret didn't answer right away. She tilted her head, examining the set of his jaw, the tightness in his voice. Something had changed in him. Or maybe something in her had finally stopped hoping. "You want coffee?" she asked, turning away before he could answer. Inside, Travis moved around like a stranger in a museum. He glanced at the photos, the dusty records stacked in milk crates, the cracked spine of a James Baldwin novel lying half-read on the sofa. He didn't sit. "So this is still where you live?" he said, as if surprised. Margaret raised an eyebrow. "It's not the Four Seasons, but the floor still keeps me dry." He chuckled politely, then dropped the smile. "Listen, Mom, I've been thinking." Margaret sat down slowly. Her knees weren't what they used to be, but her instincts were sharper than ever. About what she asked. He paced hands in pockets. "This place, it's falling apart. And you're here by yourself. It's not safe. What if something happened to you?" "What's going to happen?" she replied evenly. "A chord progression knocks me out." "Mom, I'm serious. I've been talking to Kimberly." "Ah, there it was. And we just think it might be time to consider your options." "My options?" He sat across from her finally, elbows on his knees, voice softening in that way adult children do when they're about to rob their parents under the banner of concern. "You're 72. This house is draining you. You deserve to rest. Relax. We've got the space. The kids would love to have you around. And honestly, Mom, I worry." She looked at him, then studied the wrinkles just beginning to form at the edges of his eyes, the hairline that was receding like low tide. He'd become a man without ever quite becoming kind. "Rest," she said. "Is that what this is about?" He hesitated, then leaned forward. We looked into some things. This house, it's worth a lot, Mom. The area's changing. Investors are buying. If you sold now, you'd get more than enough to what her voice cut the air like a blade sliding from cloth. To live, he said more quietly, to breathe easy. I mean, wouldn't it be better for everyone? Everyone, she repeated the word brittle in her mouth. Me, Kimberly, you. Margaret exhaled the way one does when a memory arrives uninvited. She had played Rachmaninoff while carrying him inside her belly. She had starved through entire winters to afford his clarinet lessons he quit 2 months later. She had worked nights, high heels blistering her toes so he could sleep on sheets that didn't scratch. And now he wanted the last thing she owned. Margaret stood slowly. I'm not dead, Travis. I never said you were, but you speak like I am. Like my comfort is a project you and Kimberly can plan over cocktails. Mom. No, she said. Let me finish. The room tightened around them. Even the creak of the old wood seemed to hold its breath. I've lived in this house longer than you've been alive. I know where it leaks, where it sings in the wind, where it remembers your father. I've watched entire neighborhoods disappear around it. And now, just when it's learned to be still, you want me to leave. It's not like that, Travis insisted. It's God, it's not about the house. It's about you. I want you safe. Safe. There it was again. A word that meant control when spoken by people who feared your independence. I'll think about it, she said finally. It wasn't surrender, it was postponement. Travis exhaled relieved. That's all I ask. He kissed her cheek, cold lips, lukewarm love, and walked out without finishing his coffee. The door clicked softly behind him. Margaret stood there a long moment staring at the empty space where he'd sat. Her eyes scanned the room, lingered on the piano. She walked over, pulled the sheet from its lid, and sat down on the stiff bench. She didn't play, not yet, but her fingers hovered over the keys, remembering. And for the first time in months, she whispered aloud, You're not done yet. Then softly, almost like prayer, she pressed a single note. It was off-key, but it was a start. Underneath the warm ochre sky of New Orleans, Margaret Dawson moved into her son's house with 2 suitcases, a black handbag, and a heart full of tightly folded hopes. The house on St. Claude Avenue looked beautiful from the outside, freshly painted shutters, manicured lawn, a tidy wreath on the door. Margaret stared at the wreath longer than she meant to. It was made of artificial magnolia leaves. Something about that felt ironic. Kimberly opened the door with the precise politeness of someone trained to smile through gritted teeth. You made it, she said, stepping aside as if Margaret were delivering a package instead of arriving to live there. Margaret smiled back. Your lawn looks lovely. Travis redid it last spring, Kimberly said. He wanted it ready for when you moved in. There was a pause. Margaret crossed the threshold, her suitcase wheels grinding softly against the polished wood. The air inside was cold, sterile. The smell of lavender-scented bleach clung to everything. The house had 3 floors, 4 bedrooms, and not a single picture of Margaret on the walls. Travis appeared from the kitchen, coffee in hand. Hey, Mom, need help with the bags? They're light, she replied. He took one anyway and led her up a narrow staircase. We cleared out the guest room. Kimberly even got you a new mattress. The room was small, the size of a music studio, and too clean, like it had been staged for an open house, not for a woman who once toured Europe with a piano and a passport. There were no curtains on the windows, and no space for her upright piano, just a plastic dresser, a neutral painting of a field, and a twin bed dressed in pale blue sheets. Where's the piano? She asked quietly. Travis paused. We had to leave it at your place. There's no space here, and honestly, Mom, it's just not practical. Margaret didn't answer. She sat on the bed gently. The mattress squeaked. Kimberly called from downstairs. Dinner's at 6. Don't forget to wash up. And just like that, she was no longer a guest. She was a dependent, a fixture. The first 3 days were a blur of passive-aggressive instructions disguised as kindness. Mom, the dishes go on the right rack, not the left. Can you grab the kids from school? You're home anyway. Don't cook with butter. The smell lingers. Margaret obeyed. She folded laundry she didn't wear, scrubbed countertops she hadn't dirtied, picked up a new toothbrush for Kimberly without being asked. It wasn't long before the bank card she had used for years mysteriously stopped working. Travis, she said one afternoon, holding the card out. Something's wrong. I couldn't pay at the pharmacy. Oh, right, he said, not looking up from his tablet. We consolidated your accounts for safety. Too many scams these days. For safety. Relax, Mom. I'm taking care of it. Without telling me, Travis looked up, then expression unreadable. Do you want to manage bills and taxes and passwords at your age? She didn't answer. She didn't trust her voice. He smiled again. We'll handle it. And they did. Within a week, she had no control over her finances, no access to her own prescription orders, and no room to speak her mind. Her only escape music was also soon taken away. It started subtly. Kimberly would walk past Margaret humming and say, "Could you keep it down?" The baby's napping. Then came the passive commentary, that piano music. It's very dramatic, makes the house feel tense. And then one day she walked into the living room to find the upright piano, her lifeline draped in a gray moving blanket, a chain looped around its legs padlocked shut. "You locked it?" Margaret asked, stunned. Kimberly didn't flinch. "It's vintage, right? Expensive. We don't want the kids playing with it or knocking it over." "I play it." "We know, but you haven't in a while. And it's really not the vibe of the house." "The vibe," Margaret whispered. Travis entered at that moment, saw the confrontation, and exhaled. "Mom, just let it go. Kimberly's trying to keep things orderly. You can play something on your phone if you need music." They had effectively amputated her without touching her. But the worst part wasn't the chores or the control or the piano silence. It was the cellar. It started on a Sunday afternoon when the neighbors came over, Travis's co-workers and their wives. As people filled the house, Margaret appeared at the top of the stairs in a navy cardigan and Pearl's hair carefully pinned. Kimberly saw her and said, smiling too brightly, "Oh, Mom, maybe it's better if you rest in your room. It's a lot of people." Margaret hesitated. Then Travis added more bluntly, "Can you hang in the basement just for a bit? We need space for the kids to run around." That day, they put a chair in the unfinished basement beside the washing machine. There was a space heater, a folded blanket, and an old magazine. No one came to check on her for 3 hours. The next time it happened, there wasn't even an excuse. She just heard, "You know the drill, Mom," and she went. Because arguing would have made it worse. In the basement, she began to remember songs. She would tap them on her knees. Beethoven, Debussy, Ellington. Her fingers danced against her thighs, as if the ivory keys had moved inside her. She played in silence in her mind in defiance. In the dim light of a single bulb swinging from the ceiling, she sat straight-backed, head tilted like she was center stage at Carnegie. Each note she imagined felt like a rebellion. Sometimes her fingers trembled mid-air, phantom tremors from age, emotion, rage. But she kept playing. Her music had once filled rooms, drawn tears, earned ovations. Now it echoed inside her. When the guests left and the laughter faded, the door would creak open again, and Travis or Kimberly would appear. "You can come up now," they'd say, like she were a pet, not a parent. She would nod. She would climb the stairs. But each time she left a little less of herself in that dark space. Until one night she didn't come up right away. She stayed in the basement an hour after the party ended, just tapping out a haunting phrase of Chopin's Nocturne in E minor on the side of an old paint can. It was then she realized her fingers still remembered everything, and the music, it hadn't left. They could lock the piano, they could steal her money, they could silence her voice, but they couldn't touch the concert playing behind her eyes. Not yet, and not for long. It was nearing midnight when the storm finally cracked open the sky. Margaret had been lying awake for hours, staring at the ceiling of the small guest room Travis had given her. The mattress was too stiff, the sheets too clean. Rain whispered against the window panes, like a lover asking to come inside. The thunder came low and steady, a slow drum roll across the city's ancient bones. Then bang, a noise, not thunder. It came again, bang, 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 hard, fast, and close, not from the front door. Margaret sat up, heart fluttering in her chest like a trapped bird. She slipped into her robe, the same one she wore the night she performed Gershwin in Chicago 30 years ago, though now the silk hung looser on her bones. She moved through the house with the quiet precision of someone long practiced in not being heard. The sound came from the side door, an old service entrance that led to the cellar, the very place she had come to know as her exile. The glass rattled in its frame as the wind howled, and yet beneath that storm there it was again. Tap, 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 then silence. She hesitated. Common sense whispered not to open the door, but something stronger, call it instinct or perhaps loneliness, overrode her fear. Her hand reached for the old brass knob. The hinges groaned. Outside, standing in the glow of the motion-activated porch light, was a boy, soaked, shivering, and bleeding. He looked no older than 13. Black, slim. Mud caked his sneakers and one knee. His right eye was beginning to swell shut. They stared at each other for a moment, two strangers on opposite ends of survival. "You hurt?" Margaret asked. He didn't answer, just looked past her into the dark hallway behind her like weighing his chances. "I'm not calling anyone," she added, "and I'm not sending you back out there." Still he didn't move. But when Margaret stepped aside and gently waved him in, he limped past her without a word, leaving a wet trail behind. Down in the basement, Margaret lit an old lamp. The soft golden glow made the room feel less like a prison and more like sanctuary. The boy sat on a crate, silent, head low. His breaths came hard and shallow. "What's your name?" she asked. He flinched when she brought a towel near him. "Hey, I'm not going to hurt you." Still nothing. She knelt and began to dab at the cut above his eyebrow. The boy winced, but let her. "You don't have to tell me your name," she said, "but I'd rather call you something than boy." He finally muttered Amari. The voice was hoarse, unused, a ghost of itself. "All right then, Amari, I'm Margaret." She moved to the cabinet in the corner. Travis had forgotten to lock it last week and pulled out a half-used first aid kit. Alcohol pads, gauze, neosporin. She worked quietly with a tenderness that felt maternal but not invasive, the kind of touch that asked nothing in return. Amari watched her hands move, slow, deliberate, graceful. "You play piano?" he asked suddenly. Margaret blinked. "I used to." "You still do," he said. She paused. "How do you know?" "I saw your fingers. How they move. My music teacher had hands like that." She laughed, soft and almost embarrassed. "Your music teacher must have been very lucky." He shrugged. "She quit last year." There was a silence then, not awkward but shared, like two people standing at opposite ends of the same bridge. "You hungry?" Margaret asked. Amari nodded. She disappeared upstairs and returned with a peanut butter sandwich, a banana, and a bottle of water. The kind of offering that, given in silence, speaks louder than sermons. He devoured it like he hadn't eaten in days. When he finished, Margaret was tapping a rhythm on the wooden crate with two fingers, thumb and middle in sequence. A waltz, maybe? Amari tilted his head. "What song is that?" She smiled. "It's not a song, just movement, muscle memory. Helps me think. Sounds like a song." Margaret hesitated, then let her fingers explore a fuller rhythm. No notes, no keys. Just her hands dancing across the surface of a cardboard box, like it was Steinway mahogany. Her eyes closed. Amari watched wide-eyed. "Can I try?" She stopped, looked at him, nodded. He mirrored her hand position, clumsy at first, then catching on. She guided him with soft claps and quiet counts, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Good. His coordination was messy, but his rhythm was clean. Something inside him pulsed in time. "You have an ear," she said. "I like music," he replied. "Used to sit outside the church on Orleans Ave. They had a lady who played organ, sounded like the sky opening." Margaret let that settle. "Where's your family?" she asked gently. Amari hesitated, staring down at his hands. "My mom. She got sick. It was quick. One day we were eating grilled cheese and watching cartoons. Next week she couldn't walk. I stayed with my uncle after she passed, but he drank a lot. Real angry. Hit me once. I ran. How long have you been out there?" "A while. School." He shook his head. "And the eye?" she asked, gesturing gently. "Some guys tried to take my shoes. Didn't let them." Margaret exhaled, slow and heavy. The room felt tighter suddenly. Not claustrophobic, but charged. She was looking at something fragile and powerful all at once. A boy who had every reason to become bitter, but hadn't. "You can stay here tonight," she said, "but only tonight." "I won't touch anything," Amari said quickly. "I didn't say that." Margaret smiled. "I said tonight, because I don't know what tomorrow looks like yet." He nodded. Later, when the storm outside began to soften, Margaret handed him a blanket and sat across from him. They didn't talk much after that, but as she closed her eyes and leaned against the wall, she heard it, a soft tapping, Amari echoing her rhythm one finger at a time, and Margaret smiled in the dark. Not because anything was solved, but because something unexpected had arrived. A note in a new key, a measure in a longer song. Tomorrow would come. But for tonight, in the hum of the storm and the silence of the house, Margaret Dawson was not alone. The morning after the storm, Amari was gone when Margaret woke. The blanket folded, the crate empty, no note, no goodbye. She stood in the basement doorway for a long while, one hand on the frame, the other pressed to her collarbone like she was holding something that had slipped through her fingers. The house above remained quiet. Kimberly gone to yoga, Travis at work, the grandkids probably at school arguing over screen time and cereal. The silence settled around her like static. She didn't expect to see Amari again, but that evening just after dusk there was a soft shuffle outside the side door. She opened it before he knocked. He looked surprised, guilty, maybe even a little embarrassed. "I found some bread," he mumbled, holding up a plastic bag. Margaret stepped aside. "Next time, just come in." That was how it started. Not daily, but often. He came when the sun dipped low, when the streetlights buzzed awake, and left before dawn. She never asked where he went during the day. She didn't want to fracture the fragile rhythm between them. Instead, she found a sheet of printer paper and drew 37 piano keys with a ruler and a pen C to C 3 octaves. She even shaded the black keys in soft pencil. When Amari came that night, she spread it between them like a map. "This," she said, tapping the leftmost corner, "is middle C." He leaned closer, eyes tracing the drawn lines. "No sound," he said. "Not yet," she smiled. "But you'll hear it soon enough." They sat cross-legged on the basement floor. The air was cool, but the furnace kicked on above them like a heartbeat. Margaret tapped out quarter notes on the paper with a butter knife, while Amari mirrored her with a spoon. They counted in unison. 4/4 time, then 3/4, then syncopation. He picked it up quickly. Music sat in his bones like something waiting to be released. The lessons became ritual. She taught with her voice, her hands, her silence. He learned with his eyes, his breath, his posture. There was no need for melody yet, just rhythm, just connection. In that space beneath the house, once her cage, they created a universe of invisible sound. Some nights they didn't touch the keys at all. Margaret told stories instead of concert halls that smelled like wood polish and red wine of piano benches that creaked just before the ovation of learning to keep time with a conductor's twitch instead of a metronome. "Do you miss it?" Amari asked once. She didn't answer, not with words, just ran her fingers across the drawn keys, her nails catching faintly on the pencil ridges. But one afternoon the silence in the house grew tempting. The sun had just begun its descent, casting long amber shadows through the living room windows. Travis was at a business seminar. Kimberly had taken the kids to gymnastics. Margaret stood in the doorway of the parlor, staring at the piano covered in its gray sheet like a body at a funeral. The padlock had been left unlatched. She hesitated only a second, then stepped forward. Her fingers curled around the heavy cloth, pulling it back. The piano's polished black surface glistened beneath a fine layer of dust. It was still beautiful, still proud, still hers. She reached into the top drawer of the cabinet and removed a small tin of polish and a cloth. Wiping down the keys was like unearthing something sacred. Each ivory plate whispered old memories as her hand passed over them. The lid creaked open. She sat, and then, hesitating, trembling, pressed a single key. A. The sound was soft, muffled, not from damage, just surprise. Then another. Then a chord F major. She closed her eyes. Outside, the sun dipped lower. Inside, Margaret played for the first time in what felt like 100 years. Downstairs, Amari had arrived quietly, not wanting to knock. He heard the music through the floorboards. Drawn like a moth to flame, he crept up the basement steps through the back hallway and stopped at the edge of the parlor door. She didn't see him. She was too immersed, too woven into the fabric of her own sound. He watched, transfixed. Her hands, though older, thinner, moved with impossible grace. The music was not loud. It did not shout. It spoke, with dignity, with ache, with history. After a minute, she noticed him. She paused, gave a half-smile. "Come," she said, patting the bench beside her. He sat cautious, reverent. She placed his hands over hers, showed him the curve of the fingers, the way the thumb tucks under how the wrist should float, not anchor. "Play middle C," she whispered. He did. The sound startled him. Real, crisp, a note without judgment. Now E. He found it. Then G. Play them together. He did. A major chord. It hung in the air like sunlight catching on glass. She added a left-hand bass note, then another chord. Simple harmony, a call and response between generations. They played until the light outside turned gray-blue and the room became a shadow box. When the last note faded, Margaret whispered, "You're a musician now." Amari looked at her with something like awe. "I didn't know I could make something sound like that." She nodded. "You always could. You just hadn't met the right key yet." The next morning, when Travis returned home, he didn't notice anything different. Kimberly complained about the laundry not being sorted. The kids bickered over iPad time. But outside the front door, wedged gently between the screen and the frame, was a piece of paper. Folded. Margaret opened it. In soft cursive it read, "Thank you for the music last night. I stood on my porch and cried. Please keep playing, neighbor." She folded it back, tucked it into her cardigan pocket, and smiled. She hadn't performed in front of anyone in over 20 years, until now, and her stage was a parlor bathed in fading light. Her audience, a lonely neighbor and a boy named Amari. It was enough. The sound that came from the piano that afternoon wasn't perfect. It was jagged, uncertain, half-formed, but it was alive. Amari's hands hovered over the keys, like he was holding a secret. He pressed down gently, then firmer, working through a scale Margaret had taught him on paper just days ago. His rhythm was shaky, but his fingers moved with intent, each note landing like the beginning of a sentence too important to speak. Margaret sat beside him, listening, really listening with the focus of a woman who'd once made her living, parsing sound from silence. She could feel the emotion pulsing beneath the mistakes. He didn't have training. He had story, pain, heart, and in music that was a language far more powerful than accuracy. She reached into her robe pocket and pulled out an old iPhone cracked screen barely held together by a strip of duct tape across the back. A relic like her, but it still recorded. She opened the voice memos app and without a word hit the red button. The device sat on the edge of the piano bench, its tiny microphone drinking in every note. Amari glanced over. "You recording? Only if you keep playing," she replied. He grinned, a small, rare thing, then kept going. The piece had no name. It wasn't from sheet music. It was part improvisation, part mimicry of what he'd heard Margaret play in the dark. But somehow it was uniquely his. Raw, unpolished, beautiful. Margaret closed her eyes and imagined a concert hall, velvet curtains, lights dimmed, an audience leaning forward. But when she opened her eyes, it was just the two of them in that small parlor. The music, however, made it feel like the world had gotten bigger. They played for 15 minutes. When they were done, Margaret saved the recording. She named the file Amari 1. Later that night, she listened to it again, then again. And with each listen, something began to stir in her. Possibility. Maybe it wasn't too late. Not for her, not for him, not for the song that had gone quiet inside her for too long. But the house would not stay silent for long. It started with the missing banana. Kimberly noticed it first. "Did one of the kids eat this?" she called from the kitchen, holding up the peel. Travis shook his head. "They're with me. Haven't been near the kitchen all day." Then a muddy footprint near the side door. Then a blanket folded differently. Margaret did her best to cover. "I've been walking outside for air. Maybe tracked something in." But Kimberly had a sixth sense for what didn't belong in her curated world. That evening, Margaret sat in the basement with Amari, showing him a broken melody she'd written down on the back of a water bill. He fumbled through it on the paper keyboard, laughed when he missed a note. Margaret smiled. The air between them was light. Upstairs, the front door slammed. Then voices. Then heavy footsteps. "Mom," Travis called. "Can you come upstairs?" Margaret's heart dropped. She motioned to Amari stay quiet and climbed the stairs. In the living room, Travis stood with Kimberly. She was holding a half-empty juice box Margaret had given Amari earlier. "We need to talk," Travis said. His voice wasn't angry yet, but it was brittle, ready to break. Kimberly spoke next. "Is someone staying here?" Margaret didn't answer. "There's been signs," Travis continued. "You've been behaving strangely. You're distracted. You're sneaking around." "I'm living," she said, "not sneaking." Travis stepped forward. "Mom, we found someone's jacket in the laundry. Whose is it?" She stayed silent. His face hardened. "I need to search the house." "No." What? I said no. You're hiding someone, Kimberly snapped. In our house. In my house, Margaret shot back. I paid for half this place. Which is exactly why we wanted to talk to you, Travis said, reaching into his bag. He pulled out a stack of papers, a legal folder. What's this? A financial agreement. It consolidates everything, your pension, your accounts, your insurance, into our control, for management purposes. You mean control, she said cold. It's safer, he insisted. We can protect you from people taking advantage of you. Like you. The word cut the room in half. Travis's expression turned from concern to furious. Sign the papers, Mom. We don't want to involve the courts. She looked at him, really looked, and saw a man she didn't recognize. Or perhaps finally saw clearly. I'll think about it, she said, folding the papers. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to bed. She turned and walked slowly, deliberately back down to the basement. Amari was gone. He must have slipped out the moment the argument began. Smart boy, quiet feet. Her chest ached not from betrayal but from fear, not for herself, for him. She sat down on the stool beside the piano, opened her phone and replayed the recording. She cried, not because it was sad, because it was real, and suddenly she knew what to do. The next morning, before anyone else in the house stirred, Margaret sat at the kitchen table with a lukewarm cup of tea and searched a name she hadn't typed in years. Lisa Fremont, documentary filmmaker, New Orleans. They'd crossed paths once long ago when Margaret was interviewed for a retrospective on forgotten jazz pianists. Lisa had been young then, sharp-eyed, bold, and full of questions. She'd sent Margaret a handwritten thank you note afterward. Margaret found an email address, then opened a new message. No subject, just 3 sentences. I have a story. I'm not sure how it ends yet, but I think you might help me tell it. Attached is a sound file. Something real, something that shouldn't be invisible. She uploaded Amari 1. Then she hit send. Lisa Fremont arrived on a Tuesday morning dressed like someone trying not to be remembered. Worn jeans, olive jacket, canvas shoulder bag. Her camera was hidden in a custom-cut lining of her purse, silent, steady, designed for truth-telling. She parked 3 houses down and walked the last block. The house looked just as it had in Margaret's email, tidy, sterile, too perfect, like a place where sound wasn't welcome. When Margaret answered the door, she didn't smile right away. She only stepped back and nodded toward the hallway. You came, Margaret said simply. I did, Lisa replied, voice calm, non-intrusive. I told you I would. I wasn't sure. I wasn't either, Lisa admitted. But I listened to the recording, twice. Margaret looked past her, checking the street before closing the door gently behind them. We have to be careful. They're always listening. Lisa didn't ask who they were. She didn't need to. Margaret led her down to the basement, the same one that had become both prison and sanctuary. There, in the dim yellow light of a single bulb, she sat across from Lisa on 2 wooden crates. You're not here as a filmmaker, Margaret said, voice cautious. At least not officially. Lisa nodded. No cameras. I'm a volunteer, just a woman who cares. That was their agreement. But Lisa had slipped the GoPro into her purse just in case. I don't want revenge, Margaret said, looking her straight in the eye. I want witness. Lisa sat quietly, letting that word linger in the air. Witness. Margaret began to talk. Not in chronological order. Trauma never honors time. She bounced between memories like musical motifs. Her husband's laughter when she first played Ravel for him. The ache of selling her concert piano to pay Travis's tuition. The silence in the hospital room when she wasn't told her grandchild had been born until a week later. Lisa listened, really listened. The way Margaret's own son hadn't in decades. When Margaret finished, Lisa finally said, May I hear you play? Margaret hesitated. Then come back tomorrow, when they're gone. Lisa agreed. The next day she returned. Same clothes, same camera, only this time it was powered on. Tucked in her jacket, angled through a custom pinhole. Margaret was waiting by the door. In the parlor, the gray sheet had been pulled off the piano. Sunlight filtered through sheer curtains, painting fractured rainbows across the glossy black surface. Amari was already there, sitting stiffly on the bench. He looked up at Lisa with suspicion, then back at Margaret. She's all right, Margaret said softly. She's part of the song now. Amari didn't reply, but he didn't leave. They played. No words, no instruction, just music. Margaret began with a slow left-hand progression, rich and deep, like a memory coming into focus. Amari followed with gentle right-hand arpeggios, hesitant at first, then stronger. Their sound wove together imperfect and human, filled with breath. Lisa's throat tightened behind the camera. This wasn't just performance. It was survival. Every note Margaret played seemed to say, "I am still here." Every note Amari returned replied, "So am I." When the final chord faded, Lisa didn't speak. She couldn't. She just nodded slowly, like bowing at the end of a vigil. Later that evening, Lisa began reviewing the footage. It was raw, beautiful, unfiltered. She made a project folder and titled it "The Sound They Tried to Bury." Over the next week, Lisa returned again and again, each time under a new pretense, delivering groceries, checking on an elder, helping organize the basement. With each visit, she gathered more fragments of conversation, subtle glimpses of Travis's disdain, Kimberly's sharp eyes, and tighter grip on everything Margaret once called her own. But suspicion was growing. One afternoon, Kimberly noticed Lisa standing too long by the parlor door. "Can I help you with something?" she asked. Lisa smiled. "Just admiring the piano. It's beautiful." "We don't really use it," Kimberly replied coolly. "Too loud, too many memories." Lisa nodded, feigning casual interest. "Still, it deserves to be heard." Kimberly didn't smile. Travis grew more withdrawn. He began locking the cabinet where Margaret kept her sheet music. The Wi-Fi password suddenly changed. He asked more questions. Where had Margaret been that day? What was she doing downstairs so often? Margaret kept her voice even, her routine the same. But the noose was tightening, and Lisa knew she had to move faster. She uploaded a backup of the piano duet to a secure cloud server, just in case. The camera stayed rolling, and so did the music. The video was only 6 minutes long, black screen, faint sounds of breathing, then a single title typed in white serif font, "The Music They Tried to Silence." The screen faded into an image of Margaret's hands, aged, veined, graceful, hovering over a piano. No introduction, no narration. Just the sound of her voice, warm and weathered. People think you stop playing when the stage lights go out, but some of us keep playing, even when no one's left to listen. Then the music began. It wasn't polished, wasn't perfect, but it was alive. Margaret and Amari, one woman shaped by silence, one boy still learning to speak through keys, playing a duet stitched together with raw grace and vulnerability. Lisa had edited it sparingly. Every cut was gentle, every second purposeful. A few overlaid subtitles explained context. Margaret Dawson, 72, former concert pianist, silenced in her own home. Amari, 13, homeless youth, found healing in music. The last shot was Margaret's face, softly lit, half smiling, proud. Then let her play. Lisa posted it at 6:37 a.m. on a Thursday, barely breathing as she clicked publish. By 9:15 a.m. it had 12,000 views. By noon it had 300,000. By the end of the day it was everywhere. Twitter, Instagram, Reddit, TikTok. Had Let Her Play was trending globally. Celebrities reposted it with tears in their captions. Music critics called it the most moving thing since Yo-Yo Ma played at Ground Zero. Survivors of elder abuse flooded the comment sections. A viral moment had become a movement. The next morning, news vans lined the street in front of Travis's house. Reporters swarmed the sidewalk, their voices clipped and urgent. A former jazz pianist, reportedly confined by her own family. Questions now swirling around financial misconduct. The woman whose silence broke the internet. Margaret watched it unfold from the upstairs window, wrapped in a wool shawl, one hand loosely clasping Amari's. "I didn't want all this," she whispered. "I know," Amari said, "but they did." He nodded toward the screens, her face everywhere, radiant, unapologetic. By the afternoon, NPR requested an interview. A local PBS affiliate wanted to film a follow-up segment. A jazz conservatory offered Margaret an honorary award. Even the New York Times called, asking for rights to serialize Lisa's footage as a digital docuseries. Travis was the first to crack. The door to his office slammed twice as he raced between phone calls and damage control. IRS agents had shown up with questions. So had reporters. Margaret's bank had frozen activity on the accounts he'd been managing. When he confronted Margaret, his voice was no longer calm, it was desperate. "Did you send that video?" he hissed. "I played a song," she said simply. "The world just happened to hear it. You humiliated me. I gave you chances not to." His jaw clenched. "You don't understand how bad this could get." "I do," she said, stepping closer. "I understand perfectly." He backed away. Later that night, Kimberly disappeared. Quite literally. One moment she was upstairs scrolling through her phone, muttering about lawyers. The next, her closet was empty, her side of the bed cold. She had drained one of the joint accounts, shut off her phone, and vanished. No note, no apology, just an email. "This is a sinking ship. I'm not drowning for your mother." Travis spiraled. 2 days later, the Department of Revenue released a public statement confirming an investigation into questionable financial behavior linked to the estate of Margaret Dawson. Fraud, embezzlement, tax misreporting. The media loved it. The elderly pianist, the runaway boy, the corrupt son. It had arc. But Margaret, she wasn't celebrating. She was preparing. Lisa had reached out with an invitation. A local arts nonprofit was hosting a small benefit concert for marginalized musicians, and they wanted Margaret and Amari to play. "Just 10 minutes, Lisa said. No cameras, no press, just music." Margaret hesitated, not because she was afraid, because this would be the first time she played as herself in over 3 decades. On the night of the concert, the hall was packed. It wasn't Carnegie, but it felt like it. Rows of folding chairs, exposed rafters, stage lights that buzzed softly above. In the front row sat Lisa, hands folded tightly in her lap. Amari was trembling backstage. "I'm gonna mess up," he whispered. Margaret placed a hand on his shoulder. "Mess up with truth and it's still music." They walked out together. The audience fell quiet. No fanfare, no speeches. Margaret adjusted the bench. Amari sat beside her. She nodded once. Then they began. The piece was the same one from the video, but longer now, more textured. Margaret had added an opening solo, slow, brooding, full of echoes. Then Amari entered, his right hand, delicate, searching. Their harmony came later, built from tension, not fear. The final chord was not dramatic. It was soft, certain, whole. The applause rose like a wave, then broke. Some audience members stood. Some wept. Margaret bowed. Amari followed. And for the first time in years, Margaret Dawson felt seen, not as a burden, not as a relic, not as a victim, but as an artist. And next to her stood a boy who had found his voice in hers. The front door slammed at 12:47 a.m. Margaret jolted upright in bed, heart pounding. Outside her window, the street was dark and still, save for the orange glow of the lamppost casting fractured shadows through the blinds. Downstairs, something shattered. Then a voice. Travis. Screaming. Margaret reached for her robe, her feet moving before she could think. The old stairs groaned under her weight. Each step felt like walking into a storm you knew would never pass over you. It would only crash through. When she turned the corner into the parlor, she saw him, her son, barefoot, disheveled, face red with rage, eyes unfocused like a man untethered from reason. The piano stood there quiet and gleaming, the only calm in the room. He pointed at it, spit flying. "You think this saved you?" he bellowed. "You think a song fixes what you did?" Margaret stood frozen. "You humiliated me," he roared, fists clenched. "You turned the whole goddamn world against me." He lunged, not at her, at the piano. She screamed. The first strike came from a steel fireplace poker he must have grabbed from the hearth. The impact echoed like a gunshot. The wood splintered, the soundboard groaned. He brought the poker down again, and again. Keys flew like teeth, ivory shards spraying across the room. Margaret stepped forward, arms outstretched. "Please, Travis, stop." He turned to her face, flushed eyes wide and feral. "You ruined everything," he shrieked. She reached for him out of habit, out of memory, but he shoved her back. Her foot caught the rug. The world spun. She hit the floor hard, the back of her head bouncing off the wood with a sickening thud. And then silence. She didn't move. From the hallway, Amari screamed. He had woken up when the first shout broke the stillness. Now he was on his knees beside her, shaking her shoulders, calling her name over and over. Margaret. Margaret, wake up. Blood pooled slowly beneath her hair. Lisa had arrived only minutes earlier to drop off groceries. She was standing outside, keys still in hand, when she heard the crash. She ran inside. What she saw stopped her cold. The boy. The broken piano. The woman on the floor. The man red-eyed and panting, holding a poker. Lisa didn't hesitate. She pulled out her phone and hit 2 numbers, 911. "Emergency," she said. "Violent domestic, elder injury, male suspect still on scene." Then she turned the camera on. Amari looked up. She's not waking up. She will, Lisa said, dropping to her knees. Keep talking to her. Outside, sirens began to wail. Inside, Travis dropped the poker. His hands trembled. I didn't mean to. She pushed me. Lisa stood slowly, the camera still rolling. You're done, she said quietly. Everything's on tape. I didn't touch her, he shouted. She tripped. You shattered the piano, Lisa said. You threw her across the room. None of that proves anything. The sirens were closer now. Travis turned to the back door, but Amari stepped into his path. He didn't say a word, just stood there. Travis stopped. The lights outside flashed blue and red. 3 officers burst in through the front, guns drawn, commands sharp. Hands up. Face the wall. Travis raised his arms slowly, eyes wide with disbelief. As they cuffed him, Lisa handed over her phone. Video proof, she said. Everything's here. They led Travis out in handcuffs. He didn't scream anymore. He didn't say a word. Back in the parlor, Margaret still hadn't opened her eyes. The medics came next, 2 of them, efficient and quiet. They checked her pulse, stabilized her neck, lifted her gently onto a stretcher. She's breathing, one of them confirmed. Pulse is steady but weak. Possible concussion. Lisa climbed into the ambulance with her. Amari tried to follow. A medic stopped him. Family only. Lisa looked at the medic. He is, she said firmly. They let him on. At 2:13 a.m., Margaret Dawson was wheeled into New Orleans General. She was pale, still, but alive. Amari held her hand the entire ride. Lisa sat beside him, camera off now, one hand gripping her bag like a talisman. Nobody spoke. The piano was gone. But the music wasn't. The first time Margaret opened her eyes in the hospital, the room was filled with sound, not from machines, but from a soft melody being hummed beside her. Amari, sitting by her bedside, knees tucked into his chest, head bowed low. His voice was barely audible, like a lullaby meant for no one but her. She blinked once. He stopped humming. Then Margaret, her lips barely moved. Still here. He nodded, wiping his nose with the sleeve of his hoodie. Still here. She didn't need to ask what had happened. The bruises on her arms, the tightness in her skull, the bright lights overhead, her body remembered. But so did her spirit. And it was that quiet, familiar part of her, the part that had endured decades of silence, that whispered, "You made it." 2 weeks later, she walked out of New Orleans General with a cane in one hand and Lisa Fremont at her side. By then, the documentary had already been acquired. A major studio had seen Lisa's viral footage and offered a full-length partnership. A formal deal. Margaret's story, her music, her survival, her resurrection would reach screens in over 50 countries. She accepted, but not for the fame, not for the spotlight. She had plans. The building had once been a community center in Treme, abandoned for over a decade, windows boarded, paint peeling like old parchment. Margaret had walked past it every Sunday on her way to the market. She always thought it looked like a mouth halfway through a song, silent, forgotten. Now it would sing again. She bought it outright with the advance from the documentary deal. The papers were signed with her full name, Margaret Bernice Dawson. Then the work began. She hired local crews, called old friends in jazz and gospel circles, partnered with charities and shelters. The place was reborn. They kept the old sign but added a brass plaque beneath it, the Dawson Center for Forgotten Music. It opened 6 months after her recovery. There were no velvet ropes, no ticket fees, only an open door. Inside, the first thing you'd see was a piano, restored warm mahogany framed by daylight. Next to it, shelves of instruments, clarinet, harmonica, tambourine, violin, instruments that didn't care how old your fingers were or how little money you had. Margaret taught on Tuesdays and Fridays. Lisa filmed, often capturing not scenes but moments. A 90-year-old man with trembling hands teaching scales to a girl with no shoes. A 5-year-old tapping rhythm while an old woman in a wheelchair clapped along. A motherless child discovering the joy of harmony beside a grandmother who'd buried hers. Amari, meanwhile, had a new title, assistant music coordinator. He'd earned it. A scholarship from the conservatory followed the video. They called it promise-based aid. Margaret called it justice. He attended classes 3 days a week, spent the other 4 in the community center. He taught chords, tempo, improvisation. But mostly he listened. He'd become the bridge Margaret always dreamed of building between generations, between wounds, between silence and sound. One Thursday morning, a local news crew came to the center for a feature on the program. Margaret resisted at first. "I'm not a star," she said. "You're a lighthouse," Lisa replied. The segment aired the following Sunday. The phone didn't stop ringing for 2 weeks. And then came the invitations, podcasts, interviews, a special request from a national talk show. At first she said no. Too public, too polished. But Lisa convinced her. "This isn't about your fame, it's about your voice." So she agreed. The set was bright and modern, a stark contrast to the dusty concert halls she once haunted. The host smiled warmly. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our next guest artist advocate and living proof that age does not define us, Margaret Dawson." The applause was thunderous. She walked on stage with grace, her cane barely tapping. She sat, folded her hands, and waited. The questions were softballs at first. What was it like to return to music? How did it feel to go viral? Then more pointed. What would you say to others who feel forgotten? Margaret looked into the camera, her eyes calm. "I'd say, silence doesn't mean absence, and age doesn't mean the end. Sometimes your most powerful song is the one no one expected you to sing." The audience stood. The clip hit 1 million views in 24 hours, but Margaret didn't watch it. She was too busy back at the Dawson Center tuning the old upright piano, waiting for Amari to arrive. Because fame fades, but music keeps going. The doors to the Dawson Center opened at 6:02 p.m., letting in the soft hum of the New Orleans evening laughter in the streets, wine through sycamores, and the low pulse of a city that had seen too much and still found ways to dance. Inside, folding chairs had been arranged in tight rows. White paper programs sat in each seat, printed with the words, "Evening of Healing, a concert for the unseen." At the bottom, in smaller type, featuring Margaret Dawson and Amari Dean world premiere, "The Hands That No Longer Tremble." Lisa stood near the back of the hall, her camera already recording. This would be the final scene. The last frame of a story no one had expected to tell, least of all Margaret. The old woman stood just behind the curtain, smoothing the velvet of her deep purple gown. It shimmered under the stage light like dusk in motion. Her hair, silver and pinned, framed her face like laurels. Her hands, once frail, once doubted, were steady in her lap. Amari waited beside her, adjusting the sleeves of his navy suit. He wore a silver treble clef pinned to his lapel, Margaret's gift to him the day he passed his conservatory entrance exam. The MC stepped forward, microphone in hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, voice warm, "tonight we honor resilience, we honor transformation, and we honor two people who remind us that music is more than notes, it's survival." Applause rose like a wave. Margaret took Amari's hand. Together they walked on stage. The crowd fell quiet, not out of obligation but reverence. The stage lights dimmed to amber. A grand piano sat center stage, gleaming under the spotlight. A second bench had been added beside it, smaller but equal in height. Margaret sat first, then Amari. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their fingers found their places, the keys cool and familiar. The opening bars of "The Hands That No Longer Tremble" began not with volume, but with breath. A solitary chord, low, rich, thoughtful, rang out from Margaret's left hand. Then a gentle high trill from Amari, like starlight threading the darkness. The melody unfolded slowly. It was part memory, part lullaby. Margaret's sections moved like waves, fluid, steady, never rushed. Amari's came in spark, syncopated rhythms that made the old bones of the song feel new again. Then the bridge. Here the roles reversed. Amari carried the weight, his chords fuller, more resolute. Margaret answered with grace notes, flickers of sound between phrases like wisdom speaking in pauses. And then the climax. They leaned forward in unison, hands dancing across octaves, weaving harmony from tension, the kind of playing that doesn't ask for perfection, only truth. Lisa held her breath behind the lens. One audience member sobbed, another clutched their chest. And when the final note struck clean round, fading into a silence thick with gratitude, no one clapped immediately. There was a moment, a single heartbeat of stillness. Then thunder. The crowd rose as one, standing ovation. Tears in every eye. Margaret stood bowed slightly and looked out, not into the lights, but into the faces. real faces. People who had seen her, heard her, chosen to believe she was not done. Amari bowed beside her, one hand resting lightly on her shoulder, and somewhere in the balcony a woman whispered to her friend, "That's not just a performance, that's a resurrection." Backstage, after the crowd had thinned, Margaret sat quietly, hands folded on her lap. Lisa approached. "That's the last scene," she said gently. "We're done." Margaret smiled. "No," she said, "we've just started." And her hands, they didn't tremble at all. The sun was melting into the skyline when Margaret climbed the stairs to the rooftop. The Dawson Center was quiet now, classes done, lights dimmed the echo of laughter from the last group of kids still dancing in the halls. Downstairs, Amari was cleaning the rehearsal room. Lisa had packed her camera bags, the last frame of her documentary finally secured. But up here it was just Margaret, the open sky, and the wind brushing softly across her cheeks like a memory. She had brought a wool blanket and a cup of mint tea, now lukewarm. The rooftop had become her sanctuary in recent weeks, a place above it all where she could hear the city hum without having to answer it. New Orleans stretched wide beneath her, bathed in violet dusk. The spires of old churches, the crooked windows of shotgun houses, the lazy drift of saxophone from somewhere near the quarter, it all wrapped around her like a long, slow exhale. In her lap was a stack of letters, dozens of them, some handwritten, others typed with trembling margins and ink smudges from tears. She opened one. "Dear Margaret, I'm 72 just like you. My daughter hasn't spoken to me in 3 years. I watched your video and cried so hard I forgot my own name. You reminded me I still matter. Thank you." She opened another. "I've been living on the streets of Memphis since 2021. I sleep with earbuds in. That duet with the boy, it kept me from doing something final last night." And another. "My father always said old women should be quiet. You shattered that like glass." Each letter landed like a note on a forgotten score, unfolding into a song only she could hear. Behind her, the rooftop door creaked open. Lisa stepped out carrying a manila envelope. "I should have knocked," she said, smiling gently. "You're good," Margaret replied. "I was just reading fan mail from the universe." Lisa laughed, then held out the envelope. "This came today, from the publisher." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "The book?" she asked. Lisa nodded. "Final offer, memoir, your name, your voice, your timeline. You call the shots." Margaret turned the envelope over in her hands. It was thick, heavier than paper should be. "Do you want to write it?" Lisa asked. Margaret looked out at the sky, now darkening, the last traces of sunlight kissing the Mississippi River in the distance. "I might," she said, "but not because they want to read it." "Then why?" Margaret smiled. "Because someone might need to." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Margaret reached into her pocket and pulled out a small voice recorder. "I've been thinking about how this ends," she said. Lisa raised an eyebrow. "The film?" "No, me." She hit record. The little red light blinked, and then her voice, soft but firm, filled the air. "I used to think what I needed was a home, a real one. Walls, warm meals, familiar faces. I thought if I gave enough my money, my hands, my quiet, someone might build that for me. But it never came. And maybe that's the truth some of us have to face, that we weren't meant to be kept. We were meant to keep going. Now I know better. I don't need a house. I need a piano. I don't need a family who forgets me. I need a song that remembers. And maybe, just maybe, one person willing to listen, really listen. Because sometimes one person is enough." She clicked stop. The silence that followed was full, not empty. Lisa sat beside her, said nothing. She knew the scene was done. No edits needed. Below, the city blinked into nighttime. Somewhere a saxophone moaned through an open window. "Fade out." A final card appeared against the darkness, white text on black. "For the ones who were abandoned inside the homes they built. You are not forgotten." Music rose, and then silence.